Hey folks, we're here for our weekly Future Privacy Forum Facebook Live. And of course, as always, we're talking about privacy. I'm joined by Brenda Leong, Senior Counsel and one of our policy leads. Brenda works on issues like biometrics and AI. And she's joining me today because we were just discussing a story that may have some of you worried. The story which was covered in the New York Times, let's see, this is, here's a press release from NYU's engineering school, where some of the people who worked on a study announced that they were able to, with their study, match fingerprints from that might be used on cell phones a surprisingly large part of the time. So their argument was that there is a threat that bad actors could, because of the way these sensors, which are smaller than typical fingerprint sensors that catch a full fingerprint, the print on your phone, as you know, when you've set it up on your iPhone or Android device or Samsung, catches a small partial print. And so their argument was, based on their study, and I'll let Brenda talk about the detail, that this was a problem. Now, we've taken a harder look at this, and we've talked to some of the experts in biometrics and security and authentication, and they've got some real problems with the premise of this study. And so, since some of you might be looking at this and saying, well, I like the fact that I don't have to put in a password. I used to not have one, or I used to have a real easy one because I'd always forget it. So I'm relying on that fingerprint, and I like the fact that I can get into my online bank, or the fact that Apple and others are letting me use this print as a way to avoid entering my password, and instead I'm relying on this print. So you might be worrying. So Brenda, did I describe correct? Would you give us a brief description of the study, what the academics who worked on this claimed, and what some of the experts in the biometric community, why they think this is actually perhaps really not on point?
Absolutely. So the study looked at fingerprint technology that is used commercially across applications that is designed to be interoperable. It might be a government system, it might be a commercial system, and it collects your entire full fingerprint, which of course is unique to each individual. And in that case, it's taking a certain number of points from your finger when it scans your finger, called minutia, and it takes a number of those based on the algorithm that's being used, and it saves that, and that's how it matches your fingerprint in the future. So this study looked at it and said, well, if I take that full fingerprint and then I look at just a small subsection of it in the way the small sensor on a smartphone does, I'm only getting a small subset of the total minutia collected, and that means it's more likely that that small subset might be common among people, or might be more easily replicated, or a number of other vulnerabilities that they identified.
So let me get this right. Actually testing this on cell phones right now is very hard. You get locked out right away, and you actually don't know how they work. So the academics here tested this by using general fingerprinting technology, the kind of stuff that is out in the market and used maybe by government agencies or others, where a full print is usually captured. And they can't capture a huge amount of detail because nothing would ever match, even your own finger later on. It's got to be interoperable. Many people are catching your print in other areas. It's got to work across all sorts of different conditions. And so they capture a certain amount of detail around a large space. And so they said, the fingerprint sensor on the phone is smaller, so let's just take a look at what a partial print looks like. And then they computed the possibility of having a match of a partial print, assuming that a partial print had less data than a bigger print. And sure enough, they could show that in some percent of the time.
They said anywhere from 25% up to 65% of the time they could create matches or overlapping sets of minutia in that case.
Cell phones are different.
But cell phone technology is actually different. The sensors on a cell phone don't collect data, don't collect your fingerprint in the same way that a full fingerprint scanner does. They do collect it from a smaller space, and they collect a much more intensive number of points and layer of points. So instead of the 5 or 6 minutia that might be in that small section of your skin in a full fingerprint scanner, there might be 10,000 points collected on the small sensor on your phone. And it's an entirely different algorithm process that is not designed to be interoperable, but is in fact designed to be proprietary.
Doesn't have to work on all the phones. Apple doesn't
correct.
care that
Apple,
your finger can't open up a Samsung phone.
That's correct.
So they can be very micro,
very
detailed,
and very specific to the hardware involved. And it's very important to remember too that your fingerprint stays on the phone. Your fingerprint isn't transmitted anywhere, either the image of it or the collected minutia. It's there on your phone. So the only place that it's worthwhile is there on the phone when you use your finger.
Apple suggests that their analysis shows that these prints are unique to something like 1 in 50,000.
Correct.
Right? And so Brenda then points out that, well, 1 in 50,000, well, that means there are other people in the U.S. who might match, but you'd actually have to run around the country finding their fingers. So if you made it more unique, it probably would take you 5 tries to get the print, and that, that would not be useful. You'd turn it off. So there is a goal of keeping it so that it works most of the time, but that it's so unique that it's really inconvenient for you to actually find that real person match. Many people may be aware, it's relatively recent that we've been using this sort of technology on our cell phones, but you've probably been to Disney, right? And you remember perhaps that you had to give a quick swipe when you got into to Disney. And of course, the reason Disney was doing this, and again, when they started doing it, people said, oh, you're capturing my fingerprint. And Disney said, no, we're actually just capturing a smaller point that isn't completely unique in the world. But what Disney wants to do is to make sure you don't buy a week-long pass at a discount and then stand there outside and sell at a profit day-long cheaper passes to people, making some money and giving everybody a cheap way to get in. So they print it to you. It doesn't mean there isn't somebody in the park who might fit, but where are you going to find the person with that unique print? So this does leverage the reality. Now, the technology is being improved so that one can be certain that it is indeed a human finger, and so that even attempts to try to bypass that are deterred. But anyway, we'll post a link to the New York Times story. I think Brenda's going to write up a bit of the critique here. I think useful research to be testing, but I think using as the study methodology a general fingerprint sensor which captures a much lower number of minutia, and then assuming that a small piece of that, the analogy I used, and I think Brenda's going to talk to some biometric experts to make sure that I'm not messing it up, right? Here's how I understood it. If you looked at an apple, from 10 feet away, and you took a picture with an ordinary camera, and then you carved out a little piece of that, and then you tried to find other apples in the orchard that matched, you probably would find some because of the fuzziness of that resolution. If I took a real high-powered camera and took a very detailed image and then carved out a small piece of it, and now I tried to find a unique match to that small piece, I'd have a much harder time. So I think we'll try to figure out whether I've garbled that with my attempt to turn it into something 8th grade. But our audience is here is pretty sophisticated, so we'll get you the details and let you decide on your own. I think the other bad message, right, from the conclusion that some people who maybe just read the headline is that, well, I ought not to be using the fingerprint sensor. The reality is we've seen numbers, and I think we'll pull some of them. We've seen numbers plummet when it comes to fraud and the ability of others to get in your phone, because unfortunately most people either don't have a password because of how inconvenient it is. You quickly pick up your phone, it's constantly locked. You want to take a quick look, make a quick call, or they use a password that is pretty trivial and easy to guess, certainly easy for someone else in your family to get into. And I think our message is that certainly at this point in time, this technology has far outstripped the ability of the bad guys to misuse it. We need to keep an eye on the valid attempts that are being made to hack at it, to examine and to challenge it. But right now, for most people, and in fact, the professor who did the study was asked, "So, are you going to stop using the fingerprint sensor?" And of course, his answer was, "No, this is actually still really convenient and one of the safest ways to get in." Anyway, Brenda, thanks for joining me. We'll post the link in the comments, and happy Friday. Hope we shared some useful thoughts with you today.